I never truly understood the precise hierarchy of my family until the night my mother laid it out on the dinner table. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't even particularly emotional. She was terrifyingly calm. "Your sister's family always comes first," she said, slicing her steak. "You're always last." My father nodded along as if she had just stated a fundamental law of physics. My sister, Chloe, smirked into her wine glass, hiding a smile that said she'd known this all along. I didn't cry. I didn't flip the table. I just whispered, "Good to know." Because in that split second, something inside me fractured. It wasn't my heart, it was my blind loyalty. Before I tell you exactly what I did to turn the tables, take a quick second to hit like, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. And be honest, have you ever realized you were the backup plan in your own family? My name is Alina, and for the better part of 3 decades, I learned my placement in the world without anyone ever formally explaining it to me. There were no manifestos taped to the refrigerator, no family meetings to assign roles. Just patterns, quiet, consistent, and suffocating. You only notice these patterns after they've already molded your personality. I grew up in a house in the suburbs of Chicago that looked perfectly idyllic from the street. Manicured hedges, beige siding, family portraits smiling by the entryway. But if you stood still inside that house long enough, you could feel the current of attention. It moved like a river, rushing violently toward one person and drying up into a trickle before it ever reached me. My sister possessed a gravitational pull I lacked. Family conversations orbited around her moods. Weekends were structured around her whims. When she stumbled, the family rushed in with a safety net. When she succeeded, they threw parades. I learned very early on that my role was to be the scenery, not the protagonist. I was the low-maintenance child, the one who could endure, the one everyone called resilient, which I later realized is just a nice word for neglected. I wasn't unloved. That would have been easier to process. I was loved conditionally. I was loved in theory. I heard phrases like, "Alina is so strong," or "she's so independent." But that love came with a contract. Don't ask for resources. Don't take up emotional bandwidth. Don't need us the way Chloe needs us. I cataloged these moments like evidence. Birthday mornings where my cake was a last-minute grocery store purchase, while Chloe's was a custom order from a bakery weeks in advance. Family vacations where my luggage stayed unpacked because it makes more sense to save that money for your tuition. Graduation ceremonies where I became the designated photographer, holding purses and coats while the milestones happened without me in the picture. When I eventually left for college, there were no tears at the departure gate. In fact, there wasn't even a trip to the airport. Just a quick, distracted hug in the driveway and a reminder to text when I arrived. I paid my own tuition, picked up double shifts at a diner, and learned to stretch $1 until it screamed. Every time I survived on my own, it just reinforced the narrative my parents told themselves. See, Alina is fine. She doesn't need our help. Years later, when I moved to Boston for a corporate job, the dynamic remained frozen in time. Phone calls were efficient transactions. Updates about my career were acknowledged with a polite hum, then immediately pivoted. "That's nice, honey, but did you hear what Chloe is dealing with right now?" I became an expert at listening, nodding, and keeping my own life in a sealed box while my family's drama took center stage. By the time of that dinner, the one where my mother finally said the quiet part out loud, I wasn't surprised by the ranking. I was shocked by their audacity. They were so comfortable devaluing me to my face, as if I had silently signed off on it years ago. And perhaps, by never speaking up, I had. After that night, nothing changed on the surface. That was their mistake. My parents didn't call to apologize. Chloe didn't reach out. Life continued, smooth and uninterrupted, as if they hadn't just severed the emotional cord between us. But everything had shifted within me. The requests began arriving just like they always did. A text from my mom asking if I could babysit for a few hours, which meant all day. A passive-aggressive mention of utility bills dropped into conversation like a weather report. Chloe forwarding a notification about a bounced payment followed by a crying laughing emoji, expecting me to fix it. In the past, my response was automatic. Of course, no problem, I'll handle it. This time, I didn't reply. At first, the silence felt dangerous, like I was walking a tightrope without a net. I watched my phone screen light up and felt that phantom pull in my chest, the reflex to smooth thin. GS over to be the fixer. Instead, I left the phone on the kitchen counter. I drank my coffee. I went to the office. I lived my entire day. And guess what? The sky didn't fall. That realization was terrifying and liberating. The world didn't implode because I didn't save them. There were no emergencies, just silence. Then came the second text, and the third. "Are you okay? You've been ghosting us." I was quiet because I was finally calculating the cost. I started auditing my life with the same ruthlessness I applied to my job. I looked at my finances, my time, my emotional energy. I realized a massive percentage of my existence had been allocated to them as a subsidy, money that trickled out in Venmo transfers, weekends kept free, just in case. So I began to separate my life. I didn't make a big announcement. I just acted. I moved my savings into high-yield accounts they couldn't access. I changed passwords. I stopped covering the small payments that had become expected. When Chloe asked if I could spot her just for the week, I replied with 2 words. I can't. The reaction was instant. My mom called, her voice tight with that specific brand of maternal concern that is actually just confusion. "Is everything all right, Alina? You seem distant." "I'm just busy," I said. She paused, waiting for the apology or the explanation. When neither came, she filled the void. "You know Chloe is under a lot of pressure right now with the house and the kids." "I know," I said. "I've always known." What I was realizing was that knowing her struggles didn't make them my liability. That was the turning point. It wasn't a screaming match. It was the quiet realization that my strength had become their excuse to be weak. I didn't know then how quickly they would test this new reality. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I heard the vibration before I even saw the name. It was my mother, and her voice had that sharp, jagged edge of panic. "We need to talk," she said. "Can you fly home this weekend?" She didn't offer details. She didn't have to. In my family, urgency without information always meant one thing: money. Something expensive had broken. When I arrived back in Chicago, the house felt heavier, the air thick with unsaid things. The dining room table, usually a place for performative family meals, was buried under a landslide of envelopes. Past due notices, bank letters, legal warnings. Chloe sat on the sofa, her posture rigid, staring at the carpet. My dad wouldn't even look me in the eye. My mom started talking, the words tumbling out in a nervous rush. A business investment that went south. Payments that were skipped. Contracts signed with too much optimism and zero math. She kept saying temporary like a prayer. I sat there, hands folded, listening. Then came the inevitable pause, the moment they all turned to me. "Well," my dad said, clearing his throat, "you're in a stable place, Alina. You don't have children. You can absorb this better than any of us." There it was, the expectation dressed up as a compliment. They didn't ask, they assigned. They needed me to fill the hole, to be the mortar that held their crumbling bricks together. Chloe glanced up, fear in her eyes, but also relief. She thought the solution had just walked in wearing a blazer. I didn't open my checkbook. Instead, I asked, "What is the plan if I don't help?" The silence that followed was deafening. My mom looked wounded. My dad looked baffled. Chloe looked like I had slapped her. The concept of me not helping was a foreign language. "I need time," I said calmly, "to review everything." They nodded eagerly, assuming time meant I was moving money around, not deciding if I should give it. That night in my old bedroom, I stared at the glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to the ceiling and felt a cold resolve settle over me. The next morning, I didn't go to the bank. I called a lawyer and my therapist. If I was going to step into this disaster, it wouldn't be as a daughter. It would be as a creditor. I returned to the house the following weekend. The energy was tight, desperate. The papers were stacked neatly now, an attempt to make the chaos look manageable. My sister's husband was there too, hovering by the door like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to witness the bailout. "We're so glad you're here," my mom said, her voice trembling. I sat down and placed my leather bag on the floor. Let's talk. My dad launched into the same rehearsed explanation. Bad luck, timing, the economy. Chloe added a few tearful sentences about stress. When they finished, my mom leaned in. We just need a bridge, Alina, just until things stabilize. How much? I asked. Chloe named a figure. It was massive. And what changes? I asked. So this doesn't happen again. Alina, this isn't the time for a lecture, my mom snapped. Then it's not the time for a check, I replied. The room froze. Chloe sat up. We're family. This isn't about business plans. It's a boo. T helping us. Helping who? I asked. You, Mom, Dad, who is helping me? You're different, my dad said, leaning forward. You can afford to step in. You've always been the saver. I can afford to step in, I said, my voice steady, because I have lived my entire life knowing that if I fall, no one is coming to catch me. I built a safety net because you never gave me one. My mom's eyes welled up. We didn't know you felt that way. You did, I said. You just didn't think it mattered because I never made you pay for it, until now. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick folder, sliding it across the table. This is what I am willing to do, and this is how. My dad opened the folder. His eyebrows knitted together. My sister leaned over to read. This is a loan agreement, my dad said flatly. Yes, I replied, with clear terms. Why are there conditions? Chloe demanded, her face flushing red. Because this isn't a donation, I said. It is structured capital. You don't trust us, my mom whispered. I trust patterns, I said. And the pattern of this family is to consume until nothing is left. The conditions are non-negotiable. I laid them out. Assets had to be sold, the boat, the second car, before I transferred a dime. Spending had to be audited monthly. No new debts. And mandatory family therapy, not as a suggestion, but as a contractual requirement. This is cold, my dad said, pushing the paper away. This is how a bank treats strangers. Then treat me like a bank, I said. Because when you needed emotional support, I was family. When you need money, I am infrastructure. You're punishing us, Chloe cried. No, I said. I am stopping the punishment of me. If you don't do this, we lose the house, she said. And if I do this without boundaries, I lose my future, I countered. The truth hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. My mom reached for my hand, but I gently pulled back. So this is it, my dad asked, jaw tight. Sign or sink? No, I corrected him. Evolve or repeat. I gave them 24 hours. I stood up and walked to the door. My mom called out, if we say no, are you walking away from the family? I paused, hand on the brass knob. I'm not walking away from you, Mom. I'm walking toward myself. When I returned the next day, the papers were signed. There were no thank yous, no relieved hugs, just shaky signatures and exhausted faces. But as I packed up the documents, Chloe looked at me differently. The entitlement was gone, replaced by a wary respect. For the first time, her problems were hers to carry. The fallout was slow and quiet. Assets were sold, budgets were slashed. My parents had to downsize their lifestyle to match their reality. Family therapy began a month later. It was awkward, defensive, and painful. My dad spoke in guarded sentences. My mom cried. Chloe sat with her arms crossed. I didn't speak much in those sessions. I didn't need to explain my side anymore. The contract had done the talking for me. Over time, something miraculous happened. The urgency faded. Without me there to absorb the shock, they learned to balance themselves. Chloe learned to sit with discomfort. My parents stopped volunteering my time and money. The relationship isn't perfect. It isn't a Hallmark movie, but there is space now. Space where the guilt used to fester. Space where obligation used to crush my chest. Back in Boston, my life feels lighter. I focus on my work, my friends, my peace. When my phone buzzes, I don't flinch. I realized something profound sitting in my apartment last night. For 30 years, I thought being last in my family meant I had to work harder to move up the line. I was wrong. Being last wasn't a starting position. It was a signal to leave the line entirely. I stopped waiting to be chosen. I chose myself, and that made all the difference. If this story hit a little too close to home, know that you aren't crazy and you aren't alone. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if stories like this help you breathe a little easier, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one.